Thank you for watching this ag forecast for the Western U.S. I'm Andrew Pritchard, Senior Meteorologist with Nutrien Ag Solutions. Well, as we start with a look at the infrared satellite picture across North America, our big ridge is evidently clear here across the western half of the country. You can see the very fast jet stream winds coming in from the Gulf of Alaska up and over the top of the ridge, racing across the Canadian prairie, and then down into the central U.S., where we're digging in a big trough across the Great Lakes. I'll show you the flow of the jet stream right now. Again, big trough just south of the Aleutian Islands. Ridge goes up here across British Columbia, the Pacific Northwest. Big trough digging down all the way to the Gulf of Mexico now, before the jet stream goes racing back off to the northeast. So the big question is, when is it going to rain again across the western U.S.? So we look at the last 72 hours of precipitation. We did see that rain across western portions of Washington taper off as we went through Friday into Friday night. It's been dry across the rest of the West, and it's going to continue to be dry for the next week or so. The big question is, when is it going to rain again? And your answer is not in week 1, maybe in week 2. What I'm showing you here is the European on the left, the GFS on the right, just the total accumulated precipitation over the next week. So all the way through 7 p.m. on next Tuesday. And what you see, agreement here on both models, is the western half of the country remaining entirely dry over the next week as we just continue to deflect moisture northward over the top of the ridge from the prairies down into the Midwest. But even with the rainfall that we're getting here in the Great Lakes and the Midwest, we're not tapping into the Gulf of Mexico out to the east. So this is still a dry pattern, really, for just about everyone across the lower 48. It's the East Coast that's going to see a couple of more well-organized systems tapping into some deeper moisture where we could see some rainfall. But focusing back on the West, dry for the next week, but we've got some potential hope out there kind of in the days 9, 10, and 11 time frame. So you know what can happen between now and then. That, of course, is not something that we can go ahead and put in the basket. It's just stepping back, looking at the precipitation forecast over the same period, looking at all of North America, just makes it even more impressive. You just draw a big H right there. You can see it just deflecting all of the precipitation, all of the moisture here away from the western half of the country here. So the flow of the jet stream blasting Pacific moisture into coastal portions of Alaska, British Columbia. You see some of that Pacific moisture then making it over the top of the ridge into the prairie and then off into the Great Lakes. Moisture being transported then up the east coast here, and then we've got potential tropical systems well out across the Pacific, but nothing going on across the western U.S. between now and October 6th and 7th at the very least. Again, the reason for that, the dominant ridge here that's just going to be kind of hunkered down. The pattern here does appear to be at least temporarily blocked as we talk about the next week or two. The definitions on what a blocked pattern really is can get kind of fuzzy there. But again, strong flow coming around the base of that trough in the Aleutian Islands here, coming in here across the Gulf of Alaska. We're going to see several waves just pinwheeling around the base of that trough, each wave coming up and over the top of that and then down through the prairie, strengthening our trough across the eastern half of the U.S. So again, we'll look at the precipitable water plot. We're looking at the depth of the moisture here across North America, and again, just dry air being fed out of the prairie down into much of the lower 48. No one other than the East Coast here seeing a real strong feed of any deep moisture. Again, the Pacific moisture being deflected over the ridge here into the Gulf of Alaska, coastal portions of British Columbia. So you look at the precipitation forecast, I'll take it through the next week or so, and then I'll show you where our hope shows up in the week 2 time frame. Now again, as we start off here, Tuesday, a lot of precipitation in the Gulf of Alaska, big area of low pressure with that cold front extending all the way to the Gulf. We've got moisture here across the eastern half of the U.S., but dry air spilling into the rest of the continental U.S. as we get the week started. So we'll take it through Tuesday night, going into Wednesday now. I'm just going to slowly carry on since nothing is happening here in the West. Taking it through Thursday now. Now we're getting into Friday. This is Saturday. Now we're in the first days of October, October 3rd and 4th. Still nothing making its way here into the western U.S. Getting into October 5th and 6th. We're now into next week, getting into Monday and Tuesday. Now we're starting to get some of this hope. You're starting to see a couple of waves here. One that really tries to make a push into the Pacific Northwest as we get into Thursday and Friday of next week. If you believe the European model, the GFS is also showing this hope, but it's a couple days later, not making it in until we get to closer to October 10th and 11th. But this would be our next shot. It's not until we get to at least October 8th and 9th per the European, maybe October 10th and 11th per the GFS. I've got big trust issues, though, on how we're actually getting this precipitation in. I'll tell you why in a moment. But first, the European on the left, the GFS on the right. We're looking at the ensemble forecast of total precipitation between now and October 12th. So now we are going out into the week 2 time frame. I'm showing you what both of these models bring in. The European model, a little bit more gung-ho, more significant precipitation, and making it a bit further south into portions of Northern California. The GFS brings the precipitation in, really focusing it on western Washington, then to a lesser extent western Oregon, but then really trailing off as we get into Northern California. So again, this is some hope, but it's way out there, and it's not even a slam dunk for southern portions of the West here, as really we just see a continuation of a very strong signal for dry conditions as we talk about central and southern California off into the Four Corners region. We're looking now at the probability of picking up a half an inch or more of rainfall between now and October 12th. And again, what you see here is hope, but you see the European a little more gung-ho with that hope, with the GFS a little bit more stingy and not quite bringing it as far south as the European wants to do. Additionally, as we're now taking this all the way into October 12th, you see good agreement here with keeping things dry across the Four Corners all the way back into Southern California. Again, the reason for this and why we're going to be dry for at least the next week: big trough, big ridge, another big trough, and then another big ridge. We have a very amplified and very stuck, or at least stagnant, pattern, and this is stuck and stagnant in a pattern that is dry for a lot of the lower 48. Again, we're dry in the West because we're ridging. We're dry in the Midwest because our source region is the Canadian Prairie. Where it's wet, Gulf of Alaska and western British Columbia, higher elevations up there. Also across the East Coast, where we're getting the mixing here ahead of the trough and some of that deeper moisture from the Gulf and from the Atlantic. Now, as I take the drawings off, I'll show you where we're headed. We're going to be taking this pattern with us into, again, at least the October 6th, 7th, and 8th time frame, when the European ensemble wants to build a deeper trough in here across the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada. This would be one that would bring us, again, that transport of Pacific moisture into at least far northern California, and then northward into western Oregon and western Washington. But the problem is, first of all, we got a long way to go before we get to that point. We've got a lot of moving parts, a lot of these waves making their way pinwheeling around that trough in the Aleutian Islands. Are we really going to kind of get rid of that temporarily before redeveloping this trough a little bit further off to the east? This is a pattern that we have time and time again seen advertised from the long-range models here, the European ensemble model, in the week 2 to week 3 time frame here, where we get some more ridging across the eastern half of the country. This gets us sounding the alarms with warmth spilling back into the Midwest. This gets us talking about precipitation across the Pacific Northwest if this happens as we get toward October 10th, 11th, and 12th. But what we've often seen is when we start getting excited about that, in reality, when we get into that time frame, we pass the next 2 to 3 weeks, we're just back in the same pattern where we're ridging across the West and we're bringing shots of cooler air into the Midwest, not warming across the midsection of the country. So I'm letting you know this is the next time that we have to get excited about some moisture making it into the West. I'm telling you right now, the best chance is going to be off toward the north across the Pacific Northwest. I'm also telling you right now that this has got a lot of moving parts before we get to this point, and it's not in the week 1 time frame. It is certainly not until we get to around October 9th, 10th, and 11th. So let's watch it day by day. Eric will be back. He'll take a really good in-depth look at this tomorrow with our long-range U.S. weather analysis. I know he'll be focused on precipitation in the West as one of the main focal points there. We'll have the ag forecast again on Thursday, and then I'll take another look at the West on Friday. What we got good confidence in, though, is this pattern: heat in the west, cooler temperatures in the central U.S., the Midwest, and the Great Lakes, and at times spilling down into the southeast and the northeast. Heat will continue across the west. That means we'll have to talk about fire weather conditions out there, fire weather risk. Incredible views of some of the burn scars here across western Oregon from satellite imagery yesterday. Just incredible, extreme fire weather conditions that we saw there a week or two ago with those strong winds and very dry conditions. The good news is here, we're talking about a lack of moisture, we're talking about heat, but fire weather risk not going to be jumping off the charts here, at least over the next few days. We do have an elevated risk across Montana, where we've got some strong northwesterly flow and dry conditions in that region. At times we've got offshore flow across Southern California as well. It's going to bring elevated fire risks, but as we head through the deeper part of this week, I'm just going to play a loop of our wind speeds here over the next several days, taking it all the way into, I believe, Thursday afternoon. That's correct. And so with heat, dry conditions, we're not going to have a real strong pressure gradient. So wind gusts won't be jumping off the charts. We'll have maybe some terrain impacts here, some locally stronger winds that we'll talk about with a kind of a day-by-day fire weather risk. But generally speaking, we're bringing these stronger surface winds with these cold fronts across the high plains down into the Midwest and the Great Lakes, keeping winds a little bit tamer out toward the west. So there is the silver lining to the heat. It won't be accompanied by at least extreme winds this time, unlike what we saw a week or two ago. Now, we will have to talk about some wildfire smoke making its way back in, of course. We did see this trough kind of clear things out across the lower 48. This is the forecast as we take it over the next 48 hours. Again, you can see things becoming rather smoky across the state of California and then kind of curving back up across the Pacific Northwest by the time we get to the day tomorrow. So an increase in smoke across the west as we head through the week, and it gets kind of trapped in that ridge. We'll talk about high temperatures just to wrap this video up then. 90s making their way back up the west coast as we head into the week, reinforcing shots of cool air across the central U.S. But again, the story in the west is going to be heat, dry conditions, and no real chance for organized rain until we get to the week 2 time frame.